probably looked. Though again there would be controversy. The main building, the tall building, was much taller than the present Dome of the Rock. So if we look at the Dome of the Rock, we have to envision that the temple building was another dome higher than the Dome of the Rock. There's controversy as to how it exactly looked. In this case, they have the whole building on one level, but others would speculate that only the facade was that tall, and that the rest of the building behind the facade was not quite so tall. Another factor is that the door indeed was so high that for a high priest standing on the Mount of Olives at the holy place could look in through that door and clearly see the curtain, the sanctuary curtain, the catechumenasma, inside the building. Now here they have this inner door. If they had that inner door, then the high priest would not be able to do that. So again, this would be one of the things which would raise controversy. How did it really look? And so, in front of that building, there was the altar. The altar was higher than a human being. It was not quite so high as this platform, but it would be higher than a human being. Maybe it would be as high as those doors, for example, over there. And it would be in size quite large. It would be about 5-6 meters square. And there would be ceaselessly a fire burning on top of it, and the holocausts being hoisted up. They had a ramp, hoisted up the ramp and thrown onto the fire, which was a huge fire and was always burning all the time, the sacrifices. Now, inside the Holy of Holies, only the high priest could enter once a year on Yom Kippur, which was the altar area inside the building. The tall structure. In the nave of the building, the priests could only enter according to their responsibilities. In the courtyard around the building of the Holy, only men of Israel could enter. The courtyard in front could be entered into by the men of Israel, by the priests, and by women of Israel. On the outer areas to the left and to the right, those who were not Jews were allowed to enter into those areas, but they were not allowed to enter into the inner sanctums of the temple. Inside the building. Inside the building, like separated by the curtain. In the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, the Ark of the Covenant, containing the Ten Commandments, containing the bowl with manna, the rod of Aaron, these things were inside the Holy of Holies. However, the Ark of the Covenant was lost during the time of the Babylonian exile, and since that time nobody really knows where it is located, or maybe someone knows but they don't say. Nonetheless, we do not know where the Ark of the Covenant disappeared to, and in the second temple, the Holy of Holies was simply an open, empty space. There was nothing inside the Holy of Holies. Another factor is that the literature tells us that in the first temple, the power of God was in the Holy of Holies, whereas in the second temple, they no longer felt God's power, God's presence in the temple.
Just to the very important theological fact, maybe, and the writings of the Holy Fathers of the Church were saying that when Jesus is crucified on the cross, the katapitasma, the curtain is torn apart, and you're not supposed to see what's in there. And Mel Gibson's movie, The Priest Who Fallen, they're trying to cover their faces not to see because nobody's supposed to see there. But when curtain opens, it's empty there. There is really nothing there. And it sort of points out as a transition of the Testament and patristic mind that really what was happening, the mystery of redemption, the true forgiveness of sins came through the cross of Christ. So it's not the Holy of Holies there in the temple anymore, but it's on Golgotha. The significance of tearing apart of the curtain.
Now, here on the facade, on the east side, we see the golden gates. Today they are walled in, and so here we would see the golden gates through which, according to the Messianic prophecies, Jesus as Messiah made his triumphal entry, acclaimed by the city as the king. And finally, the structure on the left side, stretching from one end of the temple to the other end of the temple, these were the arcades of Solomon. Not that they were built by Solomon, they were then rebuilt again by Herod in the rebuilding of the temple each time. But nonetheless, that was for the purpose of shade. It could be very hot here in the summertime, and standing in the middle of that open courtyard would be like standing in the middle of a frying pan when it's hot. So Solomon made those arcades for the purpose of shade, and that, according to what we read in the New Testament, is where Jesus would sit under those arcades, and he would teach in the temple the entire day. Sitting under the arcades, gathered around him would be a group of people who would ask him questions, and he would respond to their queries, and so. That, therefore, is the temple. The temple also had undergrounds, but essentially we know very little about that because the literature is almost silent, A, and point B, we know very little about the underground because no archaeological work has ever been permitted on the Temple Mount. Archaeologists have been writing volumes about the stones on the outside and what they discover all around the outer parameters, but we don't have any real information about what is on the inside of the Temple Mount.
If Islamic archaeologists were doing work there, do you think that it would be published and by other scholars?
If it would be done.
Okay.
If. Temple for the 12 tribes of Israel. And this model does not present it as having 12 gates. That's beyond the point. There's a certain amount of imagination involved in the way this has all been built and structured and so on. What we want to look at now is the city of David, the Ir David. And this is what we have here. Mount Moriah, extending from the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, the walled-in city of David. It is this strip, as it were, along this wall here. And in the city of David, we have the palace of the king. In the city of David, down farther, we have the royal necropolis, where the tomb of David and the tomb of Solomon and the other tombs of the kings of Judah are. Finally, at the bottom, there is the pool of Siloam, which was created by Hezekiah, because here there is a spring, an underground spring, the spring of Gihon. And then he made a tunnel going in the underground of the city, which then led the water from the spring of Gihon to also descend to the pool of Siloam, so that the people at that end of the city would have water closer to home rather than always have to go so far. And this pool of Gihon, spring of Gihon, continued to function so that those who lived closer to the spring of Gihon would be able to take advantage of it. On the opposite side of the valley, this was the cemetery of Jerusalem. From one end of the valley to the other end of the valley, this was all one great cemetery. And then there's the Kiropeon Valley, and beyond the Kiropeon Valley, Mount Zion. And then that's Mount Zion. Here in this altar, they present Mount Zion as being the richness of beautiful, as opposed to the ordinary. Go down there, theoretically you could say.
Is there 3 fields already? See the pool?
No,
To the left.
they are no longer there. Today, as the Romans redid the city, all of these walls don't exist. The city walls today run the length of the temple and then up Mount Zion, but from the Temple Mount. Going a little bit out, but nonetheless there. Most of Mount Zion today is actually outside the city walls.
And what about where the city of David stood?
Now it is largely an archaeological site which can be visited. but furthermore, it is also a neighborhood. Until recently, it has been a Arab neighborhood, but slowly the Arabs are disappearing and it's being replaced by a Jewish neighborhood. You will note also this is the Kilopeon Valley, which separates Mount Zion from the city of David and Mount Moriah. This is a real valley. It's not a great valley like the Kedron, which is clearly visible. It's very subtle, but as you can see it right there, there was the Kilopeon Valley, which clearly divided the two mounts. And in biblical times, there was a road which led down from that staircase. Take note of the staircase coming out directly out of the temple. And then they would walk out, today it's the Dung Gate, right out of that staircase. And they would follow the road through the Kilopeon Valley to the pool of Siloam. And on the feast of Sukkot, there was the practice that they would take a golden chalice from the temple and walk in procession to the pool of Siloam. They would draw water into the chalice from the pool of Siloam, walk back to the temple and cast the water on the altar in the temple. And they did this on each of the 8 days of the Feast of Sukkot, from the first day to the great Hosanna, Hosanna Rabbah, which ends the Feast of Sukkot. And it was during that feast, as we read, that Jesus, watching this procession, being at the pool of Siloam, he said, "I am the living water. He who drinks from me will not thirst anymore." Jesus was on the Feast of Lights, and this happened. Jesus was on the Feast of Sukkot, and this happened. Jesus was on the Feast of Pascha, and this happened.
Sean, he was the fulfillment of all those feasts.
One could say this, but just as a point of notice, that the whole Gospel of John is built around feast days.